your attachment style is your relationship to yourself first.
Yes.
And then that ends up impacting the relationship you have to everybody else. Because so much of your own relationship to self gets conditioned by like what you see around you. So a lot of your internal dialogue is your internalized dialogue. A lot of how you treat yourself is how you were treated. A lot of how you treat your own feelings and emotions is how they were treated growing up. Like we do to ourselves what we experience, and it largely becomes internalized.
Hi, I'm Kelley Namiro. Welcome to the Balancing Chaos podcast, a lifestyle podcast where we'll talk about wellness, motherhood, and some really exciting things in between. My goal is to help you develop a lifestyle that promotes health, wholeness, and success. Through my conversations with our experts and guests, I hope to inspire you to live a beautiful, full, and joyful life as you navigate balancing the chaos. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Balancing Chaos podcast. Today, we are joined by Thais Gibson, bestselling author, counselor, speaker, and leader in the personal development field. Thais has a PhD and is certified in over 13 modalities of healing, including cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, somatic processing, and trauma work. Her scientific research and personal experience and compassionate approach led her to founding the Gibson Integrated Attachment Theory, a modern expansion on the attachment theory developed in the 1960s. Integrated attachment theory empowers individuals to heal different attachments in their lives and reprogram any limiting thoughts and behaviors, which I'm super excited to jump into today because she has a whole quiz that's like super cool on her website that you can kind of dive into and see which one resonates most with you. Thais' approach to personal development has accumulated over 38 million views across her social platforms, helping thousands of people create tangible change in their lives. Through her academic training and client-based research, Thais has created renowned and inspiring courses for personal development, growth, and relationships. And these teachings have been distilled into in-depth programs, courses, and modules of the personal development school. So welcome to the show, Thais. I'm so excited to get into it with you and to talk a lot about this because I think that so many of our listeners are really interested in personal growth and have been to therapy here and there, but this is going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah. So for you, I think I'm really curious. First of all, when I saw you when you came into the Zoom, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so young. How have you gotten these many trainings and certifications all by this age?
I'm in my mid 30s. I hope I look younger than I am, but I feel like I'm getting up there.
Did you get into therapy right away out of initial college?
Not at all. So I totally went down the coaching route for a really long time and then ended up as doing counseling in really a spiritual way for quite a long time. My background's in pastoral counseling. And I think a big part of for me personally was about really bridging the gap. I did all these certifications because I was trying to bridge the gap between where spirituality, science, and psychology, because I spent a lot of time first in the traditional school system, where they all meet, where they all kind of overlap together, because I had such a deep, improvement in my own life from things like meditation and mindfulness and all these different practices. And it was wow, this is healing so much for me. So, I guess the other thing I really got into was hypnotherapy. So background as well in terms of hypnosis and the subconscious mind and how we reprogram different patterns that are contained within us that we tend to really pick up from a lot of our childhood experiences.
Okay. This is so cool because my husband and I were actually just having this conversation last night just around childhood and beliefs systems that are kind of programmed into us from a very young age. And I think I know very surface level around that, but we were talking about, when you think about your relationship with your parents and if one of them abandoned you or wasn't really there for you and all that stuff, it can create these beliefs around just your own worth. And so I'm curious to you, are a lot or are most of our belief systems created at that young age, or can we create beliefs about ourselves and who we are later on into adulthood?
So the answer is that anything that we're exposed to that is repetitive and creates an emotional response will basically fire and wire neural pathways. It's not the only way they get fired and wired, but it's a very common theme that will create basically imprints that we take on in terms of what we come to believe about ourselves.
Okay.
So you can make an argument for the fact that the first 3 years, we actually develop our deepest programming. So, the deepest things we'll come to feel and believe about our experiences are really wired into more of our unconscious mind rather than just our subconscious mind. And then from ages 3 to 8, our brain is producing mostly alpha and theta brain waves, which are the brain waves that we need to be hypnotized. So, we're in a state of what we call like hypersuggestibility really from 0 to 8 years old. And it doesn't change like the day that we turn 9, but our brain starts producing more beta brain waves, things sort of shift and change as we get beyond the age of 8. And so that's where we're uptaking our deepest programs, the things that affect us the most.
Yeah.
Now, because we have neuroplasticity, these things are always changing. So you could, for example, have a child who grows up in a really stable home until the age of 8, but then at 10 years old, their parents go through an awful divorce and everybody splits up or somebody passes away. And those things, because of the repetition and emotion of those painful new experiences, can still create limiting beliefs, fears of abandonment or betrayal or things of that nature, even if it's later on. And in fact, we can actually acquire some of those things if we have tumultuous adult relationships, even if we don't have a huge history of those things as children. But we are going to get the most deep wiring from that time first, meaning that it will take extra to change, to rewire or recondition new patterns in after that age range.
Okay. Super fascinating. So for you, then I'm just curious if you're open to share, like, what was it that you were looking to when you started getting into meditation and all of this stuff yourself? Like, what was it that you were looking to shift and change?
A lot of things. So, I mean, where do I begin? So, I was a fearful avoidant attachment style, aka the disorganized. It's the one that's sort of associated with the most like childhood trauma and chaos and all these different things.
Huh?
And I just sponged up all of the stuff. I was really in the middle, a lot of stuff that my family was going through
Mhm.
at a young age. And I was sort of parentified. And there was just a lot of chaos, a lot of big fights. My parents went through this divorce that went to like the Superior Court of Canada, had all these different sort of layers to it. And I think I just internalized a lot of it. And I had an outlet, which was very much to play soccer, to play sports. I got a scholarship to a university eventually and things like that for soccer, but I was just barely hanging on. But right before my 15th birthday, I had knee surgery, was prescribed opioids, and basically just got addicted. Like, just was like, oh, wow, life is easier taking these all the time. And it sort of transpired into something I struggled with from just before I turned 15 until midway through being 20 years old. So I was really trying to figure out life from that point forward. I did like a stint in rehab a couple of times. I did AA meetings, NA meetings, all kinds of stuff. And I just couldn't like figure out how to really get my life on track. But it was actually through a lot of like meditation and reprogramming, like learning about hypnosis and the subconscious mind and reconditioning really painful belief patterns and things I was carrying in myself, that I was able to get sober when a lot of other things weren't working for me. So that that was one of the many things that I was sort of trying to figure out at that point in time.
I think that's super helpful. And I think that becoming aware of some of these things, like for me, when I started meditating, it was all about my eating disorder and like trying to get rid of, like, not get rid of, but like to understand why that behavior was happening and why that I felt like I needed to do that in order to make myself look a certain way, like getting to the root of like the deeper reason behind the problem. And I think that so many of the different modalities that you use and teach help to do that. But I think that the first place that I want to go and talk about and what you brought up was like what was it? The fearful avoidant
Yeah.
attachment style. I think that the one that I resonate the most with when I was doing research for this episode and came across your website, I was like, okay, I'm definitely the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. So talk to our listeners about what these attachment styles are and why they matter.
Yeah, definitely. So there are four main attachment styles. The first one is secure. Originally, a couple decades ago, research was showing like 50% of the population secure, but it looks like that's downtrending quite significantly the past little while. And so maybe closer to 35% or so.
That's
Anyways,
just somebody who's like mentally healthy and like feels
well,
good.
so it's basically the attachment style that tends to do really well in relationships. They report having longer lasting relationships, but I think
Okay.
even more important than that, they report being really fulfilled by those long lasting relationships. And they grow secure because they grow up in households where there's a lot of what we call approach oriented behaviors.
Mhm.
And it kind of seems like a small thing, but it's actually a really big deal. Where basically, if a child cries in their household, their parents are attuned. So they really come towards them, they approach them, they try to figure out what's going on, they try to soothe them. And they learn that they can have healthy boundaries, that they can lean on other people, they can rely on them, they can trust that they're going to be receiving love even when they're crying or upset or hurt. And they don't have to be perfect to earn love in some sort of capacity. So that's the secure attachment style. And they grow up to have more fulfilling relationships and to trust, and they feel confident that they can be loved for who they are, not what they do or what they achieve or how they seem on the outside. So that's our secure. And that's what's maybe 50, probably closer to around 35% of the population.
Okay.
Then there's three insecure attachment styles. And those are the anxious attachment, the dismissive avoidant, and the fearful avoidant attachment style. So the anxious attachment style, you can sort of imagine being at one end of the continuum. And they basically grow up in some sort of household where they either have a real abandonment, like a parent leaves or abandons them, or a parent, maybe there's a separation. They don't really see the other parent as much. Parent passes away. It can be any of those things. But actually, the majority of the time, it's what we call perceived abandonment, meaning that parents are loving and they're there, but they work all the time. So there's this inconsistency. There's this conditioning through repetition and emotion that's firing and wiring those neural pathways that says, love is here, love is taken away. Love is here, love is taken away. So this child gets conditioned to really fear having love taken away. And they cope with that by trying to hang on really tight. And so as adults, sometimes they can try to, pretend like they're not feeling this way. But as adults, they often can be needy or clingy in relationships. And they want to move things along fast and get a sense of certainty and all those types of behaviors. Is that the one that you resonated with?
Yes. Oh my God. And it's so funny because like no knocks to my dad, and I love him. He did his best and he provided so much, but it's like it resonates so much because it's like he was always gone for work. There was actually like a couple, like probably like a year and a half to 2 years where he was like traveling for business so much that he was gone more than he was at home. And it was in those years of like, when I was like 7, 8, 9. And so it just really all resonates so much in terms of what you're saying. And then now, I mean, I think it's definitely gotten better. My husband and I did therapy for a number of years just to make our relationship stronger. But especially when I was younger in college and in my, 20s and stuff, I was always like trying to give more and like get that like response of like, you're safe, we're together, we're okay. And it's just funny how true these things are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because that's usually one of the big coping mechanisms too, right? Is to like people please, like give more, do more, be the best, earn the love, earn your
Yep.
worth in a way. And it's like the hard part is that there's this like self-abandonment that takes place within doing that sometimes that actually like perpetuates that cycle in a sense.
Absolutely. Like I am so happy that you bring that up because I think that that's a really big part of this specific attachment style. And I think we should go into detail with all of them. But like when I think about the behaviors that I had, just even with my husband, because we started dating in college and then we broke up for a while, it was like, oh, you want me to wait until 9 p.m. for you when you said 7? Okay, I'll do that. You want me to leave the bar with you now? I'll do that. I'll do whatever you want me to do, even if it's not what I want to do to make you happy so that you won't leave me. Like whatever you want me to do so you won't leave me. And I can even like kind of trace it back to what we were talking about with having an eating disorder. It's like more about like, okay, how are people going to perceive me? That's what I care about. And it's like a way of kind of trying to get people's approval so that I feel loved and accepted. And it's something that I still am working on personally to this day, but it's just funny how it all comes back to childhood. And again, it's like
100%.
it was never something that was, done maliciously by my parents. It was actually more like in a way of like, oh, I'm going to work hard so that like I can provide for you and love you. But as kids, we don't
Understand
understand
that.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like what it's intended versus how it's perceived and stored are such different things. Like your dad's probably intending to like provide and show up and do the best that he can. And he's like even thinking of how he can love you. And as a child, you're just like, my dad's not here. What's going on? And like that's that abandonment feeling. So 100%. And I just want to say one more thing before we go to the other
Yeah.
attachment styles, which is that like that also makes so much sense in regards to the eating disorder because there's that part of like, I will do whatever it takes to earn love, if I have to be
Yes.
this perfect exact image that's on the, in the media or on the magazines or whatever it is, and there can be so much pressure because it's like all the things we'll do for love, right? Like that's really what it's often boiling down to.
Yes.
So yeah, so that was a really nice share. So the other two, so there's the dismissive avoidant, who's sort of like the opposite. They grew up in a household where they go through a lot of childhood emotional neglect. And similar to the anxious, like, sure, it can be like the very overt neglect where like parents are literally never around, kid has to cook themselves dinner at a young age. It can be these extremes, but the vast majority of the time, it's like covert neglect. It's things like parents are there, food's on the table, there's structure, kids are at school on time, but if you're emotional, go in the other room, come back when you're done crying, or don't be a crybaby, or, keep your stiff upper lip. Like a lot of the messaging that somebody would get is like your emotions are unacceptable and they're going to be deflected, dismissed, or ignored. And in some cases, even shamed, like, oh, you're so weak. Don't be, that's embarrassing, get it together. So basically, what happens is this child ends up feeling kind of trapped in an environment where they can't get their needs met because we're actually really wired for attunement and for connection. And so when a child is yearning for that and can't get it, they feel trapped and they often feel like something's wrong with them. Like, what's wrong with me that I can't get these needs met? And so they often have these big fears of seeming defective or shameful. And they're very sensitive to criticism, even though they're very stoic. And they also get really afraid of being trapped in the wrong situation, being weak if they're emotional or they're too open with people. They just assume that they'll be rejected. And so this individual grows up and they cope with that fear of, going, okay, I'm just going to keep everybody at arm's length. And when things get too real or when somebody gets too close, I'm just going to shut them down, push it away, move away from it as fast as I can all of a sudden, because that's how I'm going to feel in control and safe.
Yeah.
And so they grow up to really fear commitment in relationships and fear, being too close to people, and can suddenly leave a lot of times when things suddenly get actually vulnerable or when they feel too much.
It's funny, like, because again, like I've told you, like my husband and I, we did therapy. So we kind of went through these things when we were probably not to this extent in detail, but when we were in therapy, and this is his attachment style. And again, it comes back to like his parents were doctors. They were never around. He grew up like by himself, where he was like his sister, or like he was cooking himself dinner. And like now as an adult, it's like, I would rather just walk away or leave a situation that's uncomfortable than have a conversation or try to get through it or try to process it, because no one ever helped me cope with my emotions as a child.
Exactly.
Like, it's so crazy how it shows up.
It's so true though. And that's such a great example too, is like you have two parents who are doctors, again, probably doing their best to provide, to show up in the best way that they can, but they probably don't have room to be emotional. They're probably constantly emotionally suppressed because they're seeing all kinds of, difficult things come home. They're probably burned out emotionally. They don't have room for being emotionally validating for a child or being super present. And it's like such a great example of a way that would develop.
Yeah.
And so then the last one is the fearful avoidant. So the fearful avoidant is basically they share in the side of the anxious and the dismissive avoidant in relationships. And so they fear abandonment, but they actually also fear closeness. And a lot of why this develops is because you'll see a child grow up in this environment where there's a lot of chaos. So common examples could be like, again, like seeing a really bad divorce or being in the middle of a lot of like fighting or arguing. Could also be things like having a parent with a cluster B personality disorder, like narcissism, borderline, those sorts of things, or even having a parent that's an addict or alcoholic. So if you just imagine like one example, let's say somebody has a parent and let's say it's their mom who's an alcoholic. Well, one day you might see mom come home and she's drinking and she's in a good mood. She's had a few drinks and she's actually really kind and loving. Another day she's had way too many drinks and now she's mean and she's cruel. Another day she's trying to get sober and she's detoxing and she's totally unavailable. Another day she has been sober for a little bit. She feels guilty. She's being kind. It's like the overarching theme is like, you never know what you're going to get. And so this child grows up in this house and they grow up feeling like, I really want love and I really want connection because I've had really nice moments of it, but it also terrifies me equally. And so they grow up to be the partner that's really hot and cold. They're like back and forth and up and down and like on and off. And they'll often give really mixed messages to their partners because they go into a situation being like so loving at the beginning, but similar to the dismissive avoidant, when things get really real, they start pinballing back and forth. They start like getting scared and then feeling guilty and then going back to being loving and then getting overwhelmed and frightened and going back. And it's like their inner world is chaos. And I definitely lived that, having been fearful avoidant. You're like on your own roller coaster in relationships. When as soon as things get real, it's like, oh my gosh, I really like this person and now I'm terrified at the same time. And so fearful avoidance can be confusing partners for that reason, but a lot of it just reflecting like the inner flip-flopping that they're doing as well.
Okay, so I love that you ended on that note, like that inner flip-flopping for the fearful avoidant, because I think that we kind of through all of them talked about how like obviously this is going to apply to your partner and how this is going to apply in their relationship. But even like when we were talking about the attack, the anxious, which is what I was saying, we kind of went through like, okay, how does this apply just in my own personal development and just to myself, and like how that showed up as an eating disorder. I'm guessing that with these attachment styles and like how you were impacted as a child, they're also going to show up, not just how you show up in relationships, but it's also going to mirror somehow in how your relationship is with yourself.
100%. I love that you said that so much, but I actually would say, and I say this a lot in like the work that we do, your attachment style is your relationship to yourself first.
Yes.
And then that ends up impacting the relationship you have to everybody else. Because so much of your own relationship to self gets conditioned by like what you see around you. So a lot of your internal dialogue is your internalized dialogue. A lot of how you treat yourself is how you were treated. A lot of how you treat your own feelings and emotions is how they were treated growing up. Like we do to ourselves what we experience, and it largely becomes internalized.
Okay. So if somebody goes on your website, because this quiz is free, and they identify with one of these attachment styles, what is the next step now that they're aware of who they are or so?
Yes. So I break it down into 5 major areas. So the first is that we have all these fears. So the anxious attachments are like, I'll be abandoned, alone, excluded, disliked, rejected, not good enough.
Yep.
Dismissive avoidants are like, I'll be trapped, helpless, powerless. I'll be weak if I'm vulnerable. I'll be defective if I open up. I'm stupid if I share my feelings, these kinds of things. Fearful avoidants are like, I cannot trust. I'm going to be betrayed. And they fear being abandoned, but also being trapped. So they all have these different, sort of fears that are going on. Those are not things we're born with. They get conditioned into us through our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the first stop on the train is we can recondition those fears. So these are like neural networks, and they're actually really easy to recondition. It takes about 21 days to do it. But if we're sick of feeling afraid of abandonment or afraid of betrayal or scared of being trapped and we sabotage everything, if we're going through any of those things, those are very solvable problems. And we can maybe like come back to that after. But that's pillar number 1. We recondition those fears.
And it only
number 2,
21 days.
Yeah, 21 days. Yeah, 21 days to
months and months of work.
Yeah, if you really hone in on, I'll share a tool now, maybe even on that note. Yeah, so one of the first tools, and it's sort of like it has roots in hypnosis. One of the first tools is that when we're trying to recondition, we can actually speak to our subconscious mind. So a lot of what happens is people will do things like affirmations, and they'll be like, I'm going to say, I am good enough. I am good enough. Yeah. But nobody has these issues existing at the conscious level of mind. Nobody wakes up one day and says, today I'm going to choose to tell myself I'm not good enough 300 times. Like these are not conscious mind problems. They're subconscious mind problems. And your subconscious mind is actually responsible for roughly 95 to 97% of all of your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions and decisions. Your conscious mind is 3 to 5%. So we have to actually like deal with the problem at the subconscious level of mind. Mm-hmm. Now, your conscious mind speaks language, and your subconscious mind speaks through emotions and images. So if I say to you, whatever you do not think of the pink elephant. Like didn't work. Yeah. So your conscious mind hears do not, but your subconscious doesn't hear language. It just sees emotions and images. So you see the image of the pink elephant. And so we have to speak to our subconscious mind when it comes to these big core fears that we're carrying. So there's a little process. It's 3 steps. Step 1 is to identify the wound you're working on and its opposite. So let's just say, for example's sake, I'm not good enough. I am good enough. Or if I'll be abandoned, I'll be connected. I'll stay connected. So we find the wound, and then its opposite, step one. Step two is we need to fire and wire neural pathways, which means we need repetition, emotion, and imagery, because that's how we speak to the subconscious. So we need repetitive emotions and images, which are actually just memories. Every memory we've ever had is just a container for emotions and images. If you say your favorite childhood memory, and let's say it's like you playing on the playground, you would see the images of the slide in the playground. And as you tell the story, you'd feel the emotions. You'd be like, oh yeah, and this happened. And you'd see, maybe you smile or you laugh or whatever it might be. So all we need is we need 10 memories of times that we felt good enough. They can be teeny tiny. They don't have to be these huge accolades or accomplishments. They can be like, I showed up as a good friend yesterday. I showed up well at work 2 days ago. So what we do is we create specific memories, or not create, we like retrieve specific memories, 10 of them. And step three is we write it down and record them and listen back to it for 21 days. And if we do it in the morning or the last thing before we go to bed, the first hour specifically, or last hour, we're producing more alpha and theta brainwaves, just like our 8-year-old selves, or when we're more suggestible. So it can penetrate the subconscious mind better. And if we listen back for 21 days and we really focus on feeling and seeing the images, it actually rewires these big core fears. And it works in a very similar way that hypnosis works, but it's just extended out in a way that we can actually do it of our own accord without having to like be hypnotized to get to that other side.
I really hope that you are enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick pause and invite you to come deeper with us if you're ready to explore the root cause connection to the symptoms that you're feeling. Whether you're bloated, exhausted, maybe you have brain fog, you can't lose weight. The WBK Health and Hormones course and our WBK membership and app are here to help you feel like you are empowered to take charge of your health and understand the real why behind you feeling how you do. And we give you the methods and protocols to heal with sustainable solutions. Right now, through Labor Day, get 10% off our annual membership on the WBK app with the code Balancing Chaos, all one word, BALANCINGCHAOS, and 20% off the Wellness by Kelley Health and Hormones course, and an emailed lab review with the code Balancing Chaos 20. That's BALANCINGCHAOS 20. These protocols in the course have meal suggestions, journal prompts, and supplement guides to help you heal whatever area of hormonal balance you're struggling with. With our membership, you'll receive a library of content and new workouts, recipes, and meditations every single week to keep you consistent and to allow your body to come back to its most vital state of being. Okay, now back to the episode.
Because of the fact that, like, again, like what you were saying, like affirmations are language, right? And you're just like telling yourself something, but you're not actually digesting it and believing it. This is working because it's like specific examples that you're giving yourself that are helping to rebuild trust so that you can almost like see things from a different perspective versus just telling yourself something without like the actual like backup behind what you're saying.
That's a huge part of it. Exactly. First of all, you have actual tangible proof. Right. Absolutely. And second of all, that tangible proof, because it's in memories, it speaks to your subconscious mind, because your subconscious only hears and really like connects to emotions and images. Mm-hmm. So when you have a memory, it's just an emotion and it's some emotions and some images. And so you're actually feeding your own subconscious mind the things that it can take in, which can counteract these original ideas that you've been imprinted with. And so that's what helps get that information to the subconscious level. And then as long as there's that repetition across 21 days, we really can fire and wire those neural pathways that really like embed the subconscious mind.
Okay. So tell me this then, because I'm guessing this is work that you're doing in your practice with people. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So like, what are some of the like examples of results that you've seen people be able to like shift and change in 21 days?
Oh, like crazy stuff. Yeah. Like amazing stuff. So the first thing, so I don't run a practice with clients anymore. I did that for about 10 years. And then I moved into just doing online programs.
Okay.
In client practice, it would be people who are like literally feeling this fear of abandonment nonstop, who would find themselves in a situation where they couldn't even like date without being so anxious over text messages, over like waiting to see if somebody's going to call them back, just like the feelings of doom all the time. And those things, honestly, by around like day 14, 15, they start to clear up. And then by day 21, you have to finish the 21 days if you're listening, because research shows you need that 21 days. And if you give up early, those things may come back. So you'd see people just like be like, I don't know what happened. Like, I'm just not fearing abandonment anymore. I'm not like, these things aren't like tearing me up inside. But we actually have had at this point, a little over 30,000 people come through our programs over the past 5 years. And people reported, we had all these different sort of like polls and reports that at the end of courses, people can submit. And 88.7% of people, and these are on self-paced programs, so you don't even know like if people are really doing the work, 88.7% said that by the end of it, their biggest core fears were gone. And so, these are things that, yes, there's like 12% left or 11.3% left, but like, these are self-paced. There's not like oversight. So if somebody's really committed, I've done this work a ton on myself and, been in this area for a very long time. This will really work as long as you'll carry out the 21 days. And as long as you're present, like you're trying to really feel about the memories and really see the images, because that's how we really recreate new patterns at a subconscious level.
So what are like some of like, let's say like top 3 or 5, if you can't narrow it down, biggest limiting beliefs or fears you see in people?
It depends on attachment style, but I'll tell you by attachment style. So anxious attachment, I'll be abandoned. I'll be alone, excluded, disliked, not good enough, rejected. I mean, it's hard to say that those are the only ones. Those are the big ones. If I had to say 6. Dismissive avoidance are like, I'll be defective or shameful if I open up. I'm weak. If I'm vulnerable, I'm stupid if I'm vulnerable. I'm unsafe emotionally in relationships, and I'm trapped. Like those are big, big fears. Fearful avoidance are, I will be betrayed. I will be abandoned. I will be trapped. Helpless if I rely on other people, or powerless in my life. And they also tend to have a deep wound around unworthiness, like feeling like they have to earn their worth all the time as well, similar to the anxious attachment style. And so if anybody hears those wounds and they're listening, those are the major ones by attachment style. I suggest if you don't know an antonym, just go click, type in antonym of unworthiness, worthiness. Like it's pretty straightforward. And then you need your 10 pieces of proof, record it in, listen back to it for 21 days. And that's how you can really move the needle.
I love that. I think that that's super helpful for people who are kind of feeling stuck, because I think that for me, like when I got into that place where I was like, again, like with my eating disorder, it came down to, I'm not lovable if I'm not this, I'm not worthy if I'm not this. It became a lot easier to then start to rework and rewire those patterns in my brain. Again, like meditation was the route that I used, but like there's like this tool that you're giving everyone is super helpful. So I love that. So when we think about these attachment styles in relationships, because I think that, like I said, it's worked really, really beautifully in the work that I've done with my husband through therapy, just like being more aware of these things. What are some things that like people can do in a relationship to feel more safe and to feel, or like, I guess the other way to look at it is like, do I need to set more boundaries if it's not like a romantic partner or somebody that you're in
Yeah. It's such a great question. So remember earlier I said there's like 5 major things.
Yeah.
That first one is the core wounds. I'll share the other ones just really briefly. So the other one is learn your own needs and how to meet them yourself. Learn to communicate your needs to other people. Learn to have healthy boundaries, and learn to have healthier behaviors. So we can actually recondition behaviors like the clinging response or the shutting down, stonewalling response. Those can actually also be rewired. So I like to go into like the needs part as something we can really do in relationships with other people, because you probably heard of like Dr. Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. And there's like physical touch and quality time and acts of service and words of affirmation and gifts. But like the way we love is through our needs. That's the love languages are good, like overarching themes, but our needs are so much more impactful. And I'll give you an example. I have a big quality time love language, but like if I sit down and I watch television for 2 hours with somebody, that's not going to be the same as getting my need met for emotional connection. Right. So both are quality time, watching TV or having a deep conversation. But when my need is met for emotional connection through a deep conversation, that's going to be way stronger than just watching television. So love languages are like good from an overarching theme, but we actually give and receive love more potently through our needs. And so
I feel like as women too, and I don't want to like overgeneralize, but just because of how we are raised to kind of like be quiet and like be small and all this stuff, we're often not paying very much attention to our needs. And we, again, not to generalize and say this is everybody, but a lot of the women I talk to in my practice are like, I'm focused on my kids' needs, my partner's needs, my work's needs. And it's like my needs come last. So I love that we're having this conversation around being more aware of our needs, because I think that it's something that truthfully, a lot of us could really do immense work on, including myself.
I agree so much. And I really do agree. Like, there's so much self silencing, right? That can go on, especially like anxious attachment styles, even fearful avoidance. But yeah, for sure, culturally, there's more of that with women as well. And so it's so important to be able to like actually learn to take up space. And I think one of the hard things is that if you didn't get taught that your needs could be met consistently as a child, then you think, okay, I'm just going to stuff them all down and I'm not going to really take up
Yeah.
too much space in general. And so I try to break the needs down that are most common for each attachment style too. And then, what I get people to do in our programs, and I encourage anybody to do listening, is to actually sit down and go, okay, these are my needs. If I resonate with what Thais shared in terms of my needs, and I'm actually going to go actively communicate them, because when you do share them with people in relationships with you, you feel more seen, more loved in a way that actually works for you. And often what happens is different attachment styles love the other person through their own needs, which can be really confusing. Like, you can have a dismissive avoidant who's like, I'm going to give my anxious attachment style partner lots of space because that's what I feel loved by.
Right.
It's
It's
like
like at
not
first, like,
working.
again, being in therapy with my husband, it's like, that's not how I want to be loved. I need you to, for me, like physical touch is a big one. And I need you to like hug me and love me and like show me that you love me with your actions. And for him, that was hard at first. And it wasn't something that he was like necessarily used to or even like comfortable with. But over time, I think sharing and being open with each other about it was such a helpful thing, because if we wouldn't have had like the permission to be able to do that and to be able to share openly, I don't know if we ever necessarily would have, because it's like, it feels weird to almost talk about those things when you're not used to being open and vulnerable about the way that you feel, or even I think the first thing is like, we talk about being aware of your needs. Cause like some of us are not even aware. We're like, I don't know how I want to be loved. How do I know that? And then communicating them. So I would love if you could share more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say something just briefly. I
Yeah.
love hearing your story because I really believe this. I think that each person we get into a relationship with, especially when they have a different attachment style, although it can be hard and confusing at the beginning, if we're willing to do the work, exactly what we need to work on the relationship also happens to be what we need for our own healing.
Oh, yes.
So it's like this beautiful thing because, for example, your husband probably like grew up in a household where there wasn't as much affection and touch, but that's such an important thing for us as human beings. It's actually so healthy for us.
Yes.
So it's like over time, when you get more comfortable in that, it's like healing for him as a person. And then at the same time, like an anxious attachment style, learning to self-soothe a little more and like actually have some independent time more often, that's something that ends up being really healing for them to build their own sense of self and identity and like enjoy their time alone. And so you get this like double benefit on each side as well if people are actually willing to do the work like you have.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the big needs, and like you said, I sort of break it down exactly like that, which is, what are your needs? Like, learn what they are first and then practice communicating them as that next pillar. And so big anxious attachment needs, they really need a lot of validation, reassurance, certainty. They want to feel special or like they're a priority. They want to feel like they are cared for, like they can have intimacy and closeness and touch in the relationship. And they tend to really want to feel like somebody is making an effort to grow the relationship, like things are improving and there's that growth piece. Dismissive avoidance, they tend to want the very obvious first, like the freedom, independence, autonomy. But they actually respond exceptionally well. And these are the things that even though they're stoic, these are huge things for them. They want to feel appreciated and acknowledged, not in like a huge way, not in this like validation way, like you're the best ever, you're so amazing, but like, hey, I noticed you did this and you're really showing up. Thank you. Like these like smaller forms of appreciation and acknowledgement really land with them. And they also really want to feel supported, empathized with, accepted, and understood. Those are like their biggest relational needs. Even though if you ask them, they'll be like, I don't have needs. But over time, when they're doing the work, they'll come to see that those are really big things that they require. Fearful avoidance, they tend to need the intimacy and depth of connection similar to the anxious attachment style. And they really want to see a lot of growth in the relationship too. But they also want to feel like there is freedom and exploration and discovery in the relationship. And they also want to feel like there's independence and autonomy. Fearful avoidance also really need trust. They need consistency. They need consideration. They need people to be congruent. If somebody like says one thing and does another, it's very triggering. And so those are the big things that they'll generally need in relationships. And you can see they share like a little of the anxious and the avoidant side as they would, but they uniquely need a lot of that like growth, exploration, discovery within a relationship dynamic too.
So if somebody, like, let's say somebody isn't working with a therapist and they are like just kind of recognizing these things about the relationship that they're in. And I'm going to say they are one of the avoidant types where they are going to feel, they don't want to be vulnerable, right? Like that's not what's the best way to start the communication process?
It's a great question. So the first thing is I actually get people to start in this particular case by working to pour into their avoidant partner's needs. So not nonstop, but just like making a concerted effort to do that. And you'll see within the first week or two that there's like more harmony and more connection. And then as you have that built connection, it's easier for an avoidant attachment style to hear criticism or feedback. They're extra sensitive when there's actually a disconnection, even though that's usually out of their own awareness. And so step one, pour into their needs a little bit. Step two, interdependence doesn't mean, oh, you just pour into their needs and self-silence like we were talking about, but then actually take up space. And what this looks like is you communicating what you need, but through something called positive framing. So there's a big difference between saying something like, hey, you never spend enough time with me, you don't care, versus saying, hey, I'm feeling disconnected this week and I miss you. I'd love for us to plan something really fun to do this week. Let's plan a fun date for Sunday. And if you can positively frame what you're needing so that you can take up space while pouring into their needs for that connection, you'll actually get to be heard and seen, and you dramatically increase the likelihood that your needs are connected to. And when you positively frame, it's not going to be misconstrued as criticism, which dismissive avoidants tend to be very sensitive to. So they'll actually hear your request. And I actually find that like avoidant attachment styles, when you communicate really clearly and kindly, and when you're showing up to be like vulnerable about what it is that you're needing and just being really direct and honest about it, they do really well with that. I think there's a misconception like, oh, they don't care because they can be closed off, but really that's not the case.
Yeah, they just want it to be in a more like reinforcing type of way. And I think we talked about from the very beginning, as humans, like we're wired for connection. We all want it. It's just, if it's in a way that is, it feels more loving and more constructive versus like the feedback is like, you're doing this and you're doing that. It's like, that's kind of tapping into their pain point and their wound from childhood. And it's not going to serve anyone.
Exactly. And it's like, whenever somebody's in that space, unfortunately, like avoidants don't listen when they're in their wounds, just like anybody else, right? Like when they're in their wounds, they just hear, oh, my partner's criticizing me or shaming me.
Right.
They don't hear, oh, behind my partner's criticism is actually a need that they're trying to get fulfilled.
Yeah.
And so they don't realize that. And then one partner thinks they're communicating and that they're feeling left unheard, and that the person doesn't care because they're not actually showing up for the request. But it's really the delivery will go such a long way to make all of that difference.
Love it. So for those of us out there who kind of have that more anxious, people pleasing, I want to be accepted kind of mentality, because I feel like I come across that a lot in the women that I personally work with. I love the tool that you gave around becoming aware of the fears, listening to a track, and like having that as a way to overcome the fears. When you think just about specifically around people pleasing and like putting everybody else's kind of needs before yourself, or like, for example, like, somebody asks you to do something, you say yes before you even check in with yourself. Like, is there anything in terms of tools or just like exercises or something that you might recommend to somebody who has that on autopilot? Because what I find is those people get burnout the fastest. They have typically, the biggest imbalances when it comes to their stress hormones, which is a lot of the work that I do. And so what can those people do to, one, become more aware of the behaviors, but two, start to shift them and start to honor their own needs a little bit more?
I love that. I agree with you so much. I actually like literally have a course about burnout, and I like say almost some of the exact things that you just said. And it just goes into, I so resonate with everything you said. And it's very, very true. So I give people sort of a 3-step solution for this. So the step one is actually to reprogram the core wound still, because the reason you don't have boundaries is because of a core wound. So usually it's like, oh, if I set a boundary, I'll be disliked, or I'll be abandoned, or I'll be a burden to somebody, or I'll be alone. So the reason first is that we're being boundaryless as a coping mechanism for the core wound, thinking that it's going to help us avoid having to feel that thing.
People pleasing is a coping mechanism. I think a lot of people don't realize that. It's like that is in itself a way for you to try to like get people to perceive you in a different way.
Exactly. And to avoid the deepest fear that you have, the abandoned fear, or the disliked fear, the rejected fear. So we cope. Exactly. And so first step is like, you have to reprogram the core wound, and you can actually find which core wounds you have associated with people pleasing by saying, I'm scared that if I stop people pleasing and start having boundaries, what will happen? And that's where you'll know, oh, people will think I'm not good enough. Oh, people will abandon me. Oh, everybody will dislike me. So we'll see what comes up for us there, and you'll really be able to see what core wound it is. So that's the first piece. The second piece is you have to ask yourself, you actually said this in passing, and it's like, it's so funny. It's like, oh, wow, there's so much overlap. So I actually tell people, like, part of healing people pleasing in this middle piece is learning the art of taking ourselves into consideration. It's the art of actually trying to practice attuning to ourselves. We can get that practice under our belt through practicing things like meditation, mindfulness, nervous system regulation, through like breath work, but really like an act of practicing being in our body and with ourselves. So we can actually hear our own feelings instead of our feelings just being zoned out by like everybody and everything around us. So practicing something like that as a daily habit is great to get you back into your own body and get you back into a space where you can consider what your truth is. And then number 3 is, even if we get the first 2 right, we overcome the fear, we start feeling what our truth actually is. Number 3, we have to practice boundaries using something called exposure work. And exposure work means, don't try to set boundaries on day one with your scary narcissistic boss who like you've never had a real conversation with, and you're going to tell them all the boundaries that you have. Start with the small people that you trust the most, because what we're doing is through repetition and emotion, we're actually getting positive feedback. So start with like your trusted friend who maybe like borrowed something for you and forgot to give it back. And you say, hey, can you give this thing back? And it's just a small boundary, and continue down that path, trying to set a weekly boundary if you can, where you see fit, until you're building those boundary muscles. So you're strengthening them over time. You're feeling more proficient. You're doing it with good people. And then over time, it will actually cause you to feel like, oh, this is comfortable. I can do this, and build that self-trust. And then boundaries will feel a lot easier.
I'm safe to be able to set this boundary versus like, yeah, exactly. It's like, if it's somebody who you don't have a close relationship with, or it feels really intimidating, it's like, there's no way. I remember a client I was working with a long time ago, like has like this very intimidating relationship with her dad. And it's like, if you try to go set a boundary with him when there's been this like power dynamic for so long, like it's just never going to work. And so I love the idea of building up the trust in yourself to know like, hey, I'm okay. I'm safe. This is actually something that works for me versus something that's going to work against me. And I think that coming back to just the idea of the people pleasing in the first place, and first becoming aware of, what do I think is going to happen if I don't? I just like put that into the context of my own mind back when my people pleasing was the worst. And it was like, either X person is not going to love me, or X person is not going to think, or I have my thumbs up. X person is going to think that I'm lazy. And then it's like, okay, it comes back to like, okay, well, where did I learn that? Where did I learn those things around my behavior? Like if I didn't do that, so then, when I started to explore that, it was like, it became very obvious to me where I learned those things. And one of the things that I think is really helpful from that place is being like, okay, now that I know what the fear is, what is it costing me? What if I keep people pleasing and I don't implement the boundary? What is that going to cost me? Because that, I think, pushes you a little bit more to start to do exactly what you said, which is building the trust in yourself and setting the very small boundaries at first.
Okay, so something so interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like we have so much like resonance on things. So I actually have a tool, and I put this in some of our programs, and I get people to write out like 15 costs of not setting boundaries or not changing the behavior. It's actually in the behavioral reprogramming part, that one of the other pillars. And then I get them to write like 10 or 15 benefits of breaking the behavior and doing something different.
Yes.
And then I get them to listen back to it for 21 days. And it actually helps reprogram and shift our behaviors, because if we can do that, we like see it, we feel about it, and the needle moves.
I love it. I love it. We're on the same wavelength.
Absolutely.
Thais, this conversation has been so amazing. I've loved every moment of it. And I just think the work that you're doing is so profound. So if somebody wants to continue the conversation with you or to jump into one of your courses, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm at personaldevelopmentschool.com, and that's where they can also take the attachment style quiz if they want to get their report on all their wounds and needs and all that stuff. And then I put daily content out on YouTube, which is Personal Development School Thais Gibson.
Okay, amazing. So I will put all of this information into the show notes and then link where everyone can find you. But everybody, please go do the quiz, because it's so fun and it's super fast and easy. And I just love that you offer that as like the first kind of step into this work. So thank you so much for your time today. This was wonderful.
Thank you. I had so much fun chatting with you, and this was such a great conversation. So thank you for having me.
Amazing.
I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Wellness by Kelley, or head over to our website, wellnessbykelley.com. Sign up now for the Wellness by Kelley 7-day free trial on our app, or head over to our course and now get 20% off the course or 10% off of the membership with the code Balancing Chaos, all one word, BALANCINGCHAOS. In our course, you'll get access to an emailed lab review plus protocols built out to help you heal with whatever hormonal imbalance you're struggling with. With our membership, you'll receive a library of content with our app with low impact workouts, blood sugar balancing recipes, and mindfulness meditations, all designed to help you balance your hormones and help you feel like you are living your most beautiful, joyful, and vital life. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review. That is the best way to help the show grow and get to more listeners. We hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next week.